Vampires, they're practically everywhere nowadays. Will they be ugly, bat-like creatures of the night that inspire fear, or are they super hot people who glitter in the daylight? It's a bit of a coin flip, really. Sometimes they're both, even. Warhammer Fantasy's vampires definitely fall on the less hot side of the spectrum, though I suppose they do have a certain appeal if you look at them differently. Never mind that, we're getting off topic. Today, we're going through a brief history of vampires in Warhammer Fantasy, but just a disclaimer before we start, this won't be a video covering necromancy in all its forms, and really we're going to focus primarily on Sylvania, its founding and history since. But, with that out of the way, fangs out lads as we sink our teeth into Warhammer's vampires. To begin, we're heading back about 2,000 years before the birth of the Empire, to the birth of Nagash. As you probably know by now, Nagash was not a very good dude, and after studying the magic of Dark Elves, he became the first necromancer, ruling Khemri for hundreds of years. He is defeated and forced to retreat north, but Neferata, the Queen of Lamia, manages to grab hold of his books and teachings. Led by the High Priest Wasoran, aka the Father of Vampires, she is taught dark secrets. She even tries to create her own version of Nagash's elixir of life, but Neferata doesn't quite get the formula right, leaving her with a taste for human blood. And so, the first vampire was born. Instead of seeing this existence as a curse, Neferata was more than happy to spread vampirism around the kingdom of Lamia. She is known far and wide, attracting the attention of many great nobles and warriors. One such warrior was the tactician, Vashanesh, who will be keeping a close eye on. Vashanesh was of Nagash's own blood, and gained Neferata's trust when he warned her of an attack coming towards Lamia. For this, she made him her husband, king, and co-ruler of Lamia. After Al-Khazidar the Conqueror comes in and drives out the vampires from Lamia, the survivors met up with the reborn Nagash, who revealed that Wasoran manipulated them into being pawns of the great necromancer. Nagash has a ring that will return a vampire to life after death even quicker than usual, but with this power the vampires will be slaves to Nagash and even his second in command, Arkan the Black. Vashanesh has an ingenious solution to this problem. Suicide. In a battle against Al-Khazidar, Vashanesh allows himself to be cut down and frees the vampires, as the ring needed a living vampire to exert its control. Vashanesh does return to life as promised, but doesn't return to our story for some time, as he spends many centuries travelling and testing out the limits of the ring. After that, the vamps were set free, and things start to become a bit divided among the bloodsuckers. Some, like Neferata, wanted vampires to live a life of secrecy, while others, like Ushoran, who would later found the kingdom of Strigos, believed that the bloodsuckers should have their own nations. It seems like Neferata chose the right option, at least to start with, as Ushoran's kingdom comes crashing down when orcs invade, and the once proud Strigoi vampires are driven into the wilds and eventually devolve into ghoul kings. Ghouls, might I add, as an expert on them, were created long ago when humans started worshipping Nagash in cults. They would eat corpses in order to gain his favour, and devolved into the horrible beings you see today, just like yours truly. I know I've been speaking not for very long, but I'd just like to highlight that the events we've covered have taken up thousands of years here. Nagash has been and gone again, empires have risen and fallen, and yet to our undead bloodsuckers, this has all happened into the blink of an eye. Perks of being immortal, I suppose. Before we get to Daddy Vlad and Sylvania, I'd just like to highlight some of the other big vampiric events that take place beforehand. Firstly, there's Abrash. Once a skilled swordsman in Nehekara, Abrash was not a willing vampire, and since he turned into a bloodsucker, he's been going around scrapping other vampires across the world. He even managed to beat his thirst for blood when he drained a dragon dry in the World's Edge Mountains. No, not like that, get your mind out of the gutter. Hearing the tales of Abrash curing himself, he created a new following of nobler vampires who also wanted to be free of the blood thirst. Mostly, vampires remain in the old world, but one empire of the undead gets set up in the south of Lustria when Luther Harkon is accidentally taken there by Norse raiders. Unknowingly, when Norse raiders attack an imperial ship, they took on a vampire aboard, and by the time they landed in the land of the lizards, they were all enslaved or turned into undead thralls, allowing Luther to set up his new digs in sunny Lustria. Right, I believe we're ready to talk about how Sylvania came about. Well, the Sylvania we know today, that is. Prior to the vampires taking over, Sylvania had just been another part of the Empire really, a province like any other until the Black Death hit the Empire around 1,000 years after its formation. 3/4 of its population were wiped out, and Skaven looked as if they'd take over the Empire until the necromancer Frederick van Hel stepped in. As a resident of Sylvania, he didn't exactly want to see it fall to the Vermintide, and so he rose a huge army of the plague victims to fight the rats back. Aided by a mysterious prince known as Vladimir, he beat back the rats and managed to hold out for decades against them, but even when Van Hel is felled by his apprentice, he dies knowing he's done enough damage for Count Mandred Ratslayer to come in and send the Skaven packing. Vladimir, this mysterious, powerful prince, does not die in the defence of Sylvania, nor is he labelled a hero by the Empire. He's a stranger, at least to the Empire, but he is familiar to us. For you see, dear viewer, Vladimir is not only the vampire who would become Vlad von Carstein, but he is also the once proud warrior Vashanesh. Dialing back the clock a little, I'll explain how Vlad actually ended up in Sylvania. After the whole scenario with Nagash, Vashanesh set out travelling like I said, and his travels took him to Kislev. The name Vashanesh didn't really suit the harsh, cold land of ice, and so he chose the name Vladimir instead, forging a new identity of a prince. It seems Vlad couldn't handle the cold for long, as after a while he decided to journey south, to a place he'd visited when he was a mortal and in the service of Khemri. Sylvania was not necessarily a paradise, but it was a place ripe with potential, one already touched by necromancy, and a province that Vlad could easily take power in, given the right circumstances. Luckily, those circumstances popped in the imperial calendar year 1797. Otto von Drac, the last of the mad von Drac counts, cursed the gods as he lay on his deathbed. A cruel man, hated even by his family, he vowed he would rather marry his daughter Isabella to a demon than have his brother take power. I wonder how that's going to turn out. He wouldn't allow any other nobleman from Sylvania either to marry her, as he hated them all, but no one outside of the province wanted Isabella, despite her beauty. Then, heralded by pounding hooves and rumbling thunder, a stranger arrived in Castle Drakenhof. He was tall, handsome, and of noble bearing. Introducing himself as Vlad von Carstein, he gave an account of his bloodline and took Isabella's hand in marriage. As the final words of the ceremony were completed, Otto von Drac passed away and Vlad was given rule over Sylvania. His first act was to throw Otto's brother out of a window, ensuring he would not be challenged. Having lived under the oppressive rule of the von Dracs for generations, most of Sylvania's people actually preferred Vlad's rule. He was eccentric, but mostly kept to himself, and when he stopped a band of veteran brigands from demanding tribute by cutting them down, his popularity was assured. At first, Isabella von Drac was fairly cold to her new husband. He tried charming her, but she resisted, and after that Vlad instantly fell in love with her. We always want what we can't have, am I right, fellas? Luckily for Vlad, Isabella actually did reciprocate his feelings, but she wanted something more. She wanted the blood kiss. Vlad didn't want to give that curse to her, but days later Isabella fell deathly ill. Not wanting to lose his love, Vlad gave her the powers and curse of vampirism. Meanwhile, off in Bretonia, Wallach Harkin, an old student of Abrash, arrives at Bloodkeep. After slaughtering the unworthy, he turns those remaining into vampires, creating the Blood Dragons. While their keep would eventually fall, there were survivors that turned into some of the most feared cavalry units in the old world. Back in Sylvania, old Vladdy is totally secure in his rule. His GF is a vampire, his people are fine with being ruled by a weirdo who only comes out at night. He's got it all, and yet Sylvania isn't enough for Daddy Vladdy. Vampires are ambitious by nature, and he believes he can take over the throne of the Empire. How hard can it be? After getting some warpstone from Mordheim, Vlad decided now was the time to act. He revealed his true nature to the world and raised an army of the dead, starting the Vampire Wars. The first of these conflicts lasts almost 50 years. Vlad causes terror with thousands of undead troops, devastating Ostermark, Talabekland and Stirland. He offers clemency for those who submit to his rule, but is ruthless to those that oppose him. At the siege of Middenheim, the Empire thinks it has won, as the Grand Master of the White Wolves takes Vlad's head, forcing the Sylvanian army to retreat. However, the next year, Vlad returns, and the Grand Master is found dead, bloodied and battered. 40 years after he begins the Vampire Wars, Vlad makes his way to Altdorf. His army swells with the undead corpses of those he's slain beforehand, and the living are outnumbered by the dead. All seems lost, even with Altdorf as well defended as it could be. Grand Theogenes Wilhelm III tries desperately to figure out a solution when he is visited by one bald, foolish son of Vlad. Manfred von Carstein told Wilhelm the secret of Vlad's immortality, and so the Theogonists sent out the Empire's greatest thief, Felix Mann, to steal the ring. On the walls of Altdorf, Wilhelm III then attacked Vlad and threw them both down onto a wooden stake waiting below. Vlad perished, unable to resurrect, and at the sight of her love's death, Isabella committed suicide as well. For now, Vlad is gone, and his underlings are left to try and win the Empire for vampire kind. Peter and Fritz von Karstein make an effort, but are cut down easily enough. It is only when Conrad rears his ugly, manic head does the Empire see another great threat. Manfred leaves to travel south, and Conrad's bloody reign nearly leads him to the throne. A more powerful warrior than a skilled necromancer, Conrad can still raise the dead and nearly manage to have one of his zombies win the election to become emperor. Sadly, his plot was found out. On the battlefield, Conrad slayed thousands, but he was brought low by an alliance of men and dwarves at the Battle of Grim Moor. This leaves the Sylvanian throne open for the bald man Manfred to step in. Manfred believes he's cleverer than Conrad and Vlad, and that he'll be the one to take the empire. He bides his time, builds his forces, and yet even though he reaches the walls of Altdorf, like his predecessors, he is thwarted and defeated again by men and dwarves at the Battle of Hel Fen. After Manfred dies, there's a massive power vacuum in Sylvania, one that the Empire takes full advantage of by scouring the land of the undead, trying to ensure no vampires will rise to power again. For hundreds of years, there's not even a peep from the von Karsteins, but then, about 20 years before the end times, Manfred von Karstein is resurrected. Over the next decades, rumours begin again of the undead living in Castle Drakenhof, but every witch hunter sent to investigate disappears, never to be heard from again. Some von Karsteins don't follow Manfred's rule when he returns. Niklaus von Karstein has had enough of the bleak clouds overhead and wants a fresh start. He transports an entire castle into the Galleon's graveyard and reinvents himself as Count Noctilus, commander of the Dreadfleet. I'll keep the mention of the end times brief here because I know we've gone over it plenty. Nagash returns, brought back to life by Manfred and Ark the Black, but with his revival, Nagash also summons Vlad and Isabella back from the dead. Feeling discarded, Manfred does all he can to thwart Vlad, while Daddy Vladdy tries to help the forces of order at the Battle of Altdorf. He fails in doing that, licking some tainted blood from one of the Glottkin, but makes it all the way to the Battle of Middenheim, where he meets Isabella in battle. Possessed by Nurgle, Isabella is not the woman he loves. Still, Vlad won't fight her, and instead he removes his ring, places it on her hand, and throws them both onto a wooden stake, freeing her while bringing himself to a permanent end. Manfred then goes on to prevent the forces of order from winning the day by killing Balthasar Gelt and blowing up the world in kind. And there you have it, a brief but mostly complete look at the vampires in Warhammer Fantasy. I know this also sort of doubles as a Vlad video, but his lore ties in nicely with the history of Sylvania and vampires in general. Let me know who or what you want me to cover next, but until then, I'll be seeing you, ghouls and gals.